So how did this all begin? And in a minute I'll hand you over to John. He tells the story much better. John is based in Boston. He's actually from Connecticut. And we were both invited to a book launch in Boston Library, the Burns Library, Boston College. And to say it was bizarre is an understatement. But one good thing happened was I encountered John Walsh. I'm a historian, and John is the creative. I don't know creative what, but John is, as he tells me, creative. So in some ways it's an unlikely relationship, but I'd always wanted to write a book on the famine that appealed to a younger generation. And I felt that art was the best way to do it. So when John told me he was a graphic artist, he had an Irish background, and he was interested in the Great Famine, I sort of propositioned him.
At this event, it was in the Burns Library, like Christine said, and it was somewhat posh, and there were all these really important people there.
Us.
Because she
and us.
No, well, Christine, you Google her, world-renowned famine expert, and then there was me, and they just were desperate enough that they needed somebody to collect all the empties for deposit or something. It was pretty bad. I'm not sure why I was even there. Christine and I struck up this conversation, and I have been working, as Nick said, on my own graphic novel for a while now, and it's more about immigration from Ireland during the famine era. But so I was already working in this with these themes, and so as Christine and I started talking, we really hit it off. And this is all while we were in this really, really bizarre event. Like I said, fancy, but the whole thing was presided over by this strange little man in a tuxedo who was giving out strange awards to people that weren't there.
They were dead.
Yeah, it was really strange. And so it was fitting that an Irish project came together while we were talking about dead people. And we hit it off, and within a few, maybe 2 or 3 weeks after we met at this event, we decided, okay, let's do this. Let's come up with this book and go full steam ahead.
And that's 2 years ago, so this book has been a long time in the making. We had a theory because there was a new mayor of Boston at the time whose name was also John Walsh. So we sort of thought they might have invited the wrong John Walsh. But I was very happy they did so because it has been a very fruitful relationship. So, Nick sort of told you about me, but I am a historian. I did my PhD in Trinity College Dublin on the famine when nobody else was writing about it, and I have written a few books on the famine. But they have been scholarly books, references, footnotes, etc., etc. So just to emphasize, this is a new departure for me. And also, wearing my other hat that Nick talked about, I am director of Ireland's Great Hunger Institute, which is, you probably have never heard of it, but we are based on campus. We were founded in 2013, and the mission is to promote scholarly understanding of the Great Famine. And again, I'm always trying to think of new ways that can be done, because people don't always want to read history books. I wish they would. I'd love them to buy my books, but I know realistically, not everybody wants to find out about a topic that way. And John.
Here's an example of some of my work from my book, Go Home, Paddy, where, as I said, I'm exploring immigration, but specifically the bigotry and the prejudice that the Irish encountered when they came to the States. So the themes are prejudice, bigotry, racism, which is, happening right now in our country at the moment. People are being persecuted for their religion, for their sexual orientation, for their skin color, and I'm dealing with a lot of that, and the same stuff was happening 150 years ago. So this work really kind of dovetailed in many ways to what Christine and I have done with the Bad Times.
Mm-hmm. And I think what John says is right, because although we're talking about famine, the issues are still with us, the prejudice, massive emigration, and then prejudice even after people have emigrated. So in some ways it's a universal story, and it's a very relevant story. Any questions? Okay, very quiet audience. So what was the inspiration for the Bad Times? And for me, it was really an image I saw. Have any of you been to the Great Hunger Museum on Whitney Avenue? Okay, so if you haven't been, you're in for a treat. If you have been, you might recall at the lower level, at the very back, there is an image of 3 children. And even though it's called the Great Hunger Museum, they only in fact have one piece of art that they think actually was created at the time of the Great Famine. And this is it. It's called Irish Peasant Children, Daniel MacDonald, and they think it's from 1846. So 1846 is the second year of the potato failure, and it's the year when things are really starting to get bad. So really 1846 marks the onset of the famine. And these three children haunted me because I tried to imagine what happened to them during the famine. Did they survive? What is their story? And also because I think you can see the artist is so clever, the three children, their personalities speak to you. They're three very different children, but obviously they're very close. And our other tagline is, can friendship and love survive the great hunger? And again, that's one of the questions we tried to address. So anything you notice about these three children? And we assume they did exist. What would you say the little boy at the back, can you think of one word? Yes?
He was very mischievous.
He's impish, he is mischievous, he's adorable. You want to take him home, but you know he'll be trouble. He is adorable. The girl in the middle? Notice she has bare feet. And, sorry?
Looks like depressed, sad.
Yeah, very wistful, thoughtful, sad. So she knows something is happening that's not good. When you see images of 19th century Irish women, they often wear red petticoats, women from the west of Ireland, because they had access to a plant that gave red dye. So red petticoats red skirts are very common in the west of Ireland. And then the character on your left, do you think it's a boy or a girl?
Girl.
Girl?
Looks like they're wearing a dress.
Okay, it's a boy in our book. I think it's a boy, but the curator of the museum thinks it's a girl, but I don't know if you can be certain. But she is holding in her hand, it looks like a bottle. And what is one word to describe him or her? Forlorn, sad. Again, if so, they know something is about to happen. But three different characters. So they are the basis for our book. And this is John's imagination of them. Liam, the boy with blonde hair. Dan, the impish one. Bridget, the wistful, thoughtful female. And then what have we included in here? A dog called Coo. That is an Irish word. It's the old Irish word for dog or hound, Coo. And we'll come back to Coo. So, why does the hunger matter? For many reasons, but the Irish famine, which lasted approximately 6 years, to this day is one of the most lethal famines in modern history in terms of population loss. In the space of only 6 years, Ireland lost 25% of her population. And to this day, the population of Ireland has still not recovered. It is smaller than it was in 1845. So Ireland is still living with the legacy of the Great Hunger. And then when we think of Ireland and the famine, we of course think of emigration and the mass movement of people. And John has talked about some of the situations in the world today. If you think of the Syrian crisis, what's happening in Europe, in some ways that's comparable to what happened to my ancestors, perhaps your ancestors, in the 1840s. So as an event in history, it's significant. It certainly changed Ireland, and it probably changed the rest of the world as a result of mass emigration, which didn't stop in 1852. It continued. And 1845, the population of Ireland was 8.5 million people. By 1901, it was 4 million people. So the famine changed Ireland absolutely. John, to talk?
As we started to develop the story, obviously we wanted to reach a completely different and new audience. So as I've gone out and I've talked to people about the famine, it's usually the same crowd over and over, and it's over 60 often, and we just really wanted to reach a whole new generation. So we thought, base it on the kids, have it aimed towards young adults, and make it attractive, accessible, and authentic. So the authenticity is all Christine. Christine knows the history inside and out. And the attractiveness, hopefully, is my artwork. And accessible was to make, more than anything, a really good story. We didn't want to preach. We wanted to draw everybody into the story so that they really felt for the characters, understood the characters, and hopefully we've succeeded.
Okay. And just 2 words we kept in mind: visual literacy, because again we know the younger generation have much more visual literacy than maybe the older generation, and it's a medium they like. And then a concept we were introduced to by Dr. Garvey, who is here today, transmedia. He said you have to think beyond the book. Nobody just thinks about books anymore. Where else can you take this project? And so we'll come back to some of our ideas for what next with this project. So, authenticity, as John says, I'm a historian. I sort of feel I have to get the dates right, what happened right, etc. So, authenticity in terms of history, people, and places. So, it's very much located in an area that suffered very badly. Many of the people in our novel actually existed, and I hope the history is correct. And this is a memorial from County Clare, where our graphic novel is set, and it's based on an actual story. The buildings were built just before the famine, called workhouses, and they're really harsh institutions that people who were desperate went into to get a basic form of relief. And during the famine, these awful workhouses became overcrowded. But in the Kilrush workhouse, again our location, a little boy was left, and he had a note pinned to him by the local policeman saying, "His parents have died, please take him in." So literally, this is the little boy left there. So, the concept. Okay, I'll talk to the concept. Okay, it takes place over 3 years. The potato blight first came to Ireland in 1845, and why did it matter, the blight on the potato? Because at this stage, over 50% of people in Ireland depended on potatoes. That was their subsistence food. They had no other food. So when the crop failed, they were very vulnerable. And the crop had failed before, but generally only for 1 year. What makes the Great Famine unique is the longevity of it. The crop failed in 1845, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, and 51 in varying degrees. So it really was a 7-year famine. And we begin our story in 1846 when the crop fails for the second time. Nobody had died in the first year of shortages, but the impact of a second failure of the crop was instantaneous, and there was mass mortality in Ireland before the end of the year. And just in case you don't know anything about Irish history or British history, at this stage, Ireland was a British colony. It had been so for over 600 years, and the British government ruled Ireland from London. The British government was at the centre of a vast, wealthy empire. They could have intervened to stop the starvation, but they didn't do so. So people died. So we start in 1846, and we just trace the period of 3 years. So,
before you go on, about the concept, one of the things that was so appealing to me about working on the project was my experience is a real Irish-American experience, a real inner-city Irish-American experience. And Christine brought all these ideas to the story that I had never even heard of before, all these little details and big concepts that I had never come across in any of my experiences with my family, my extended family. And so getting to work with some of these things was really, really appealing for me. And truthfully, it was almost in many ways like taking a master course with a master. I learned so much during the process. I probably came to the table thinking, oh, I got this. And then I worked with Christina, and I realized, oh my God, I don't know anything, But that part of the concept of when we started to develop it was so appealing for me. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and I've been doing this since I did my PhD, which is many decades ago, but I'm still learning. So even though I sort of know stuff about the famine, I'm always learning, and I'm always thinking of new ways to understand it. So photography was around at the time of the famine, but it was very much in its infancy, and there are no photographs of the famine. But in 1847 and again in 1849, the Illustrated London News asked an Irish artist to go to the worst places in Ireland and to capture the awfulness of the famine. And these are some of his images which you see. They've become iconic, but they're quite overused because we don't have much more else. But this is Bridget O'Donnell and her children, and she really existed. And in 1847, the artist went to West Cork, which was suffering very badly. In 1849, he went to West Clare, which was suffering most of anywhere else in the country. So what to call the book? And again, if you have any ideas, maybe is it too late to change it? But if you have any ideas, so some people refer to what happened in Ireland as the potato famine. I really don't like it because it suggests the potato alone was to blame. To me, it's a much more complex mixture of political intervention or lack of. So I don't like saying the potato famine. It's much more complex. The Great Irish Famine. In Ireland, people tend to call it the Irish Famine, the Great Famine. In America, less so. People in America don't like to use the word famine because they think it implies shortage of food. But as I would say, famine is never about food shortages. It's always ultimately about political decisions. The Irish starvation, some people like to call it starvation, depending on your perspective. You'll notice at Quinnipiac, people led by our president like to refer to it as the Great Hunger, which in Irish is An Gorta Mór, big hunger. I have a theory that's a real late 20th century invention. We decided to call our book The Bad Times. And we know from reading that people who survived the famine actually referred to what they'd been through as the bad times. So again, that authenticity, what did the survivors refer to it? The bad times. And in Irish, it's An droch-shaol. Or if you're from Belfast, because there are 3 different Irish dialects, it's An droch-shaol. But because we're set in the west of Ireland, it's An droch-shaol.
Speaking about the usage of the term famine implying that there was no food, we have a handout in the back that actually has the page where we show there was plenty of food in Ireland and the British were just taking it out and not giving it to the people that were right there.
Yeah, again, we know from some research that massive amounts of food were exported from Ireland during the famine. And so people who were starving would have seen that food being exported and in fact would have travelled on the same ships if they were emigrants. So it wasn't simply about food shortages. And then just the Irish genocide, which some people like to call it, and again, it depends on your perspective, but you can see there are different names, and we felt the bad times and droch-shaol was the most authentic. So throughout our text, we do use Irish, because before the famine, about 30% of people in Ireland would have spoken Irish, particularly in the west of Ireland. Many of them would have been bilingual. So we included some Irish, but at the back of the book, we have a glossary. And most of the Irish is confined to really bad times. So the phrase at the bottom, if somebody dies, may her soul be on the right hand of God. And so we do have Irish, but it's very limited, again, just to try and keep it authentic. So, fearful realities. Our target audience is probably people from 12 upwards. And we knew that we couldn't avoid issues that were unpleasant. It's a famine and people die, and they don't always die in a very pleasant way. But how do we deal with this? And in our book, people die of starvation, we have a suicide, and we have other forms of death.
And trying to find a balance there was tricky. And that was a real exercise in creativity, thinking how can we present these horrible incidences yet not completely turn off a 12-year-old or a 12-year-old's parent who might buy the book for the 12-year-old. So some of that, we spent a lot of time just hashing out ideas. We would sit for hours at a time and just go back and forth with ideas, and I would do little thumbnails, and we would try to figure all this out. And for the most part, there were a few things that we decided were too graphic, and we just cut it out of the story completely. But for the most part, we kept the heaviness in the book. But one of the beauties of doing something like a graphic novel is you can imply a lot of things instead of just flat out showing it happen.
Should we talk about grandmother?
So there's a grandmother in the book, and at one point we thought maybe she should die. And Christine has the knowledge of the history, and it turns out that some people were eaten by pigs. And I said, I don't think that would go over too well with 12-year-olds or their parents. But that's a really good example of, we have all these heavy things that we had to figure out a way of getting around that, or showing it without really showing it.
Yeah. Because again, in any famine situation, the most vulnerable groups are children under the age of 9. They suffer most mortality, and old people. And if I can add a further spoiler, but the grandmother is so weak that she isn't eaten by pigs. She's eaten by rats, but she is too weak to defend herself. But again, eyewitness accounts again and again talk of people who are too weak to do anything being eaten alive, just part of them, by dogs, by rats, by pigs. So it really is, again, just to stress how awful famine is. So we really didn't want to sanitize it, but again, part of that authenticity, but how do you present something so awful? Any questions? Okay, so location. It's set in the west of Ireland, and as I told you, County Clare is an area which suffered very badly during the famine. And Kilkee, can you see Kilkee? It's very, very edge, it's on the waterfront, and if you go any further west, you reach New York. I mean, it's that far west in Ireland. And again, striving for authenticity, we based John's artwork on actual images from the period. So this is the local town of Kilrush in 1849. And have you been to Kilrush? It's beautiful. And this is Kilkee. You can see it's on the waterfront. It actually was a seaside resort, a Victorian seaside resort in the 19th century, and it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. So, the main characters.
Liam Hayes, he's an only child. His mother is dead. He lives with his father, and we really play up the fact that he doesn't get along all that great with his father, and the lack of a mother in his life leads him to kind of be the forlorn character of the entire story.
Mm-hmm. But he is the wealthiest of the 3 children because his father owns a shop. Do you want to know what a pawnbroker is? Okay. And his father is one of those people who actually makes money during the famine, because people are so desperate, and he's not a very likeable character, and that leads to a lot of conflict between Liam and his father. And Liam is the only one of the 3 children who has shoes, and he frequently brings food to the other children.
Dan O'Brien, he still lives with his parents. He has siblings, a brother that has emigrated to America already. He has a sister who works in the big house, which is the manor, and she works there as a servant, and Koo is his dog. But if you notice, just in this slide, his appearance is so much more different than Liam's. Liam has a vest, a coat. He's just kind of ragtag. His hair is all over the place, to show the class difference between the 2 of them.
And he doesn't have shoes. But the big house is the way we refer to the big, as you said, manor houses. So I remember having a conversation with Sandy, my friend in the library, about a big house, and she said, in America that means the prison. So you need to be very clear. So I didn't know, but in Ireland we call the old big houses, and they're usually owned by Protestant landlords. People the land was taken from the native Catholics and given to Anglo-Irish Protestants. So there's a real difference between the people who own these big houses and the people who live on the land that they own. And again, the authenticity. Colonel Vandeleur was a real character. He owned the main house in Kilrush, and he probably evicted more people during the famine than any other landlord in Ireland. And that's why mortality in the area we've set our book in was so high. 50% of the local population died in Kilrush. So again, that's, you know, trying to get real people in, real situations in. Bridget?
Bridget lives with her parents. She has two siblings who are younger, Marie and Michael, and her grandmother still lives with them. And Bridget, as you can see in the way I drew her, I tried to keep that feeling of the worrying that was in the original picture, the painting. Again, you see her clothes are kind of ratty and tattered, and even though you don't see it in that slide, she doesn't have shoes either.
Mm-hmm. And it's Mamo, which is the Irish word for grandmother, who dies, who perishes. There is quite a bit of death. And Bridget is very much maternal towards the other children, always tries to be positive, and Dan is in love with her. So there's sort of a little love interest going. And this takes place over 3 years, so by the end the children are 17, 16. And finally, Coo, the dog. I'm a big dog person, so I wanted to put a dog in. And again, Coo at times provides light relief. At times, and he becomes a focal point in the story. So he is Dan's dog, and he is devoted to him. Dan found him when he was a puppy, and he's very much typical of the dogs in the west of Ireland, the sheepdogs that you see everywhere. And Coo, I told you it's an Irish word for dog, and it actually comes from an Irish giant. We love our giants, and the giant is, any of you heard of Cuchulainn? Famous, and he was the giant who looked after the Cullen family. He was known as the dog of the Cullen, so that's Cuchulainn the giant. But in reality, Coo the dog is based on my puppy. So this is my puppy Coo. So there is a real Coo. So the story. Do you want to?
The story opens in July of 1846. At the festival of Lughnasa, and here is I don't know where this is from, but this is a representation of the god Lu. So this would have been a pagan god, the god of harvest. And at that point, so here was another example of something I didn't know about at all. As I said, my experience has really been an Irish-American experience. So Ireland, even at that late date, 1846, we always think of Catholic Ireland, there were still these pagan festivals, and here was one right before the famine where they're almost praying to this pagan god that their crops will come through okay and that they will survive.
So as John said, this is the harvest festival, and usually it's a joyous time because people are celebrating the new crop coming in. And so in Ireland, traditionally, they'd light bonfires, they'd have drink, they'd dance, they'd have music, etc. So this is the start. Everyone is looking forward to the festival of Lu that evening. So we start with the festival of Lughnasa, and within a day or two, people realise that the blight has returned to Ireland. So very quickly we're into the real storyline. The things we look at throughout the book, the hunger and the desperation of the people, the increasing desperation of people, the relief efforts. What did the government do? Not enough, quite honestly. What did private individuals do? Because Quakers and other religious groups went to Ireland to help the Irish. So we involved the Quakers in our story. We look at the sickness and the starvation and the impact of that. And then we consider escape, which for many, if it wasn't death, was emigration.
So in terms of the writing, these would kind of be the beats of the story. We have to cover this, but it is historical fiction. So we want to take all this and put it into our story in a way that's meaningful and not hitting you over the head with just fact after fact after fact. But this would basically be the beats of the plot.
And moral dilemmas. So any famine situation, any difficult situation. So in Ireland we talk about taking the soup. Some people who came to Ireland to give relief actually also at the same time wanted to convert the poor Irish Catholics to Protestantism. So they offered soup with one hand and a Bible with the other hand. And if I ever teach about the famine, I often say to my students, if you were starving, if your family was starving, would you convert? I would. I mean, for me, it's a no-brainer. But then afterwards, people felt guilty if they converted because they were, even though they had pagan elements, people were deeply religious. Beg. If you were starving, would you beg? And actually, it was illegal to do so. So you could be put in prison if you begged, but would you do it anyway? Would you steal? And part of our plot line is that dilemma of would you steal to survive? And would you leave Ireland, the country you were born in, the country you love? So what would you do? All these choices. And none of them easy. And again, just to go back to the artist I talked about before, James Mahoney, this is part of his artwork. He was travelling to the west of Ireland and his carriage was stopped. And this woman approached the carriage with her baby. And he described her as being a fine-looking woman with a fine-looking child. And he assumed she'd stopped the carriage to beg for money, for food. And then he realised that the baby was dead and she wanted money to bury her child. So again, we know some real stories from the famine. So the script.
So after we had worked out a plot, we came up with like I said, we factored in those beats. We already knew our characters, and then we needed to really break it all down. So after Christine and I had hammered out this plot, Christine went away and wrote a script that basically was, think of it like scenes or chapters. And when she broke this down, there would be some initial dialogue like this and some ideas of what's going on in the scene. So I'm not going to read this, but you get an idea. B is Bridget, D is Dan. And this is just a conversation they're having, but also little indications of what's going on. Eat some, so forth.
And again, that ominous building up, because bilberries were traditionally eaten at Lughnasa, but a small crop. And we know that there is going to be a small potato crop. And then Liam arrives, so again, this is all very early. And Liam has been in the shop, and some people have been in, and they said that blight has appeared in other parts of Ireland. So again, straight away, we start with the festival, but straight away we know that the blight is going to appear very, very quickly.
So each page that after Christine did the script, I started to break down the pages, and this is just an idea of what a page looks like as I'm physically drawing it. Next one, please.
Any questions?
So you're dealing with historical fiction, graphic novel form for a particular age group, 12 and up. When you were doing this, did you have any models of historical fiction that came to mind that you were particularly moved by or thought were good models for a project like this? And also particular graphic novels that you thought were, not that you were imitating them, but that they're just examples that stood out to you that were inspiring? Or
One of the books that we talked about the very first time we met was it's a graphic novel called American-Born Chinese by Jean Yang, and it's an exploration of being raised Chinese in America and some of the contradictions between the two cultures. And the simplicity of that book really spoke to us. And as I drew the book, I didn't do any kind of fancy shots. I didn't do anything complicated. I really focused on just keep it really simple. Simple. Easy to read was something that we really wanted it to be. Just, you didn't have to sit. Some graphic novels, there are no rules with graphic novels for the most part. You can do whatever you want, and you can read some things that are extremely challenging form-wise, structure-wise, story-wise, and then there are things that are really simple that are just as good. And we wanted it to be really good but really simple because of our intended audience.
Yeah. The other one is Mouse, which I'm sure most people know in terms of dealing with an unpleasant, unpalatable topic. So we talked a lot about Mouse. And every time I go to Ireland, I always scan the graphic novel shelves. There are not many Irish graphic novels. There's one on 1916, which is not great, I don't think. But it's a growing art form in Ireland, but there aren't many specifically Irish ones. So, but we did, as you say, try and take our inspiration and see what had been done. But we felt ours was very unusual in terms of its topic, and it was so historically grounded. And just in terms of our target audiences, again, we talked about who are we aiming this at, and increasingly we wanted it to be an educational tool, and we felt maybe 12, 13-year-olds, and we took advice from Andy Shell in the education department about what age group, but we thought there were two other constituencies. So Irish people in general have a great interest in the Great Famine, and they would probably be interested because of the topic, and then there's a whole world of people who just like graphic novels because they like that as an art form, as a medium, etc. So although we talk about our 12-year-old target audience, they're very specifically our educational target audience.
So here's a quick look at what my thumbnails are like for each and every page. So we would have that plot, and we would have the script, and we would know, okay, they're at the festival, and there's an effigy of the god Lu, and Bridget's younger siblings are there, and there's a bull because they would sacrifice a bull, and there's characters. And as you see, everything, even in the thumbnail stage, not only is it's like shorthand for me to figure everything out, but the shots are so simple. They're just straight on. There's nothing really complicated. No bird's eye view, no worm's eye view, no. I'm not staging it like a film where you're moving around that much. It's just all really simple. And so this just gives you an idea as we're going along, and I'm figuring out how many pages does it take to tell this specific scene, and little notes to myself, notes to Christine. As you can see here, there's Liam saying, "You seem worried. I'm scared." That's in the dialogue. Just at this point, trying to figure out somewhat where the balloons will go.
I'm curious how you perhaps establish the rhythm or the pacing, if you will, of the panels. And I sometimes in my classes give an assignment to develop storyboards.
Yep.
And students are sometimes struggle with, well, how many individual panels does there need to be? And do I have to show every action, or is it sufficient to show perhaps the start of the movement, the end of the movement? So you break that down a little bit.
Right. So storyboards for film are very much, he walks into the room, he takes a left. It's camera movement, whereas comics, everything is in these gutters in between the panels, and as a reader, your mind figures out, wait, what just happened? So you don't need to see, Dan grabs Bridget and says, let's come dance. You don't need to see them turn and see Liam. You don't need to see Liam coming up a hill. Your mind figures that out quickly. And when I'm breaking down a scene, one of the goals is to get in and out. Don't spend too much time, especially on this book. Keep it simple. You can. I've worked on projects before where you can kind of decompress everything and just let it go out over pages, and it can be really slow and very artistic and nice. But for this, it was just keep it moving quickly, and so it was tell the scene in as few pages as possible. So figure out what really, really needs to be there. Anything else, just cut out.
And was there editing of the script?
Yes.
As a result of
So
your decision?
we did this, and after I thumbnailed the whole book, Christine and I sat down and went through everything again and came up with new scenes, took out some scenes, changed dialogue, all of that.
Yeah, it was very much backwards and forwards. And just to say, the book in total is 103 pages, so it is, I suppose, quite substantial.
Yeah, the collaboration was really organic. It was a lot of back and forth and give and take, and we're still friends.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay.
So specifically, here's page 11. Liam, you seem worried. Bridget, you get the idea. I'm putting their initials on the little characters, not only for Christine, but for myself. When you've laid out 103 pages, I don't know who everybody is. And it gives you ideas. So in this script, it doesn't say anything about the bull, but that was something we had already talked about. So I knew that had to fit into this scene. So you just see a bull and you see a scribble of a man. We knew that the two twins, the younger siblings of Bridget, were going to fall asleep. That's not in the script, but we knew that was needed to be in the scene, so I added that. And then, if you go to the next page, you can see I wanted it to end the scene and this page to end kind of ominously. And in the previous pages, you'll have seen there's this effigy of the god Lu at the same time that somebody's about to sacrifice the bull. So I tried to juxtapose the effigy with a sound effect, because you know he's about to slaughter a bull, to get across what's coming the character's way. So here I've penciled out the page, and you can see notes to myself: fix the eye. I didn't like how this this layout was, so I just crossed it out and I drew that panel on another piece of paper. But you can see where it's going. If you go to the next slide, please. I did a different drawing of that, put that in, center the twins. This is all little process stuff. I ink everything on a board, and then I scan it in. If you would do the next one. And this is what a final page looks like after it's been completely inked, colored, and lettered. And we used a letterer in Ireland who can also read and write the Irish language, because there's going to be an Irish language version of the book that we're hoping to get into the Irish school system. And it was easier to have somebody that was already laying out all the balloons to just go in and change it to the Irish language than to have me do it and then have me struggle to figure out how to flow the Irish language text in. But this gives you an idea of what a finished page looked like and the process getting to that. And by this point, we probably changed the script just the tiniest bit, and the letterer put in some sound effects for us, and that was the end of that scene.
Yeah, and just as John said, it was organic, but we talk about what sort of nose should Bridget have.
That's right.
Yeah, so we sort of tried to pay a lot of attention to detail. The twins, you always see them holding hands, because they're so close, and then one of them dies and they can't hold hands anymore, and then the other dies. So, but we did try and build up that they had their own individual characteristics. So, the end, I say no spoilers, I've given you a few. The grandmother dies, the twins die, it's
no
a famine.
No pigs, don't worry.
But the story closes in 1849, and it's not because the famine is over, but really, for the children, that's a pivotal moment for them. I won't tell you what happens to them. So our story does close there. Any questions? We have a few more things to say, but any questions on the storyline or John's artwork?
You guys said that when you were talking about the artwork and the way that you were pacing it, that you would focus heavily on simplicity
Yes.
and making it go quickly and trying to get it as simple as possible.
Right.
Was that to make it more accessible to the younger audience that you guys are trying to go for, or does that have some sort of significance?
I would say it was a combination of trying to reach the younger audience, and some of it is what I prefer as well. You'll see some graphic novels where, say, the art style it's almost realistic, and that's fine, because as I said, I don't think there are any really real rules for graphic novels. I like simple. I don't necessarily always want to do simple shots, but my artwork, the fewer lines, the better, and that worked well with this project. So it was kind of the two going hand in hand.
Okay. So,
Yes, John, you said you did layouts for the entire thing first.
Yes.
Would you normally work that way if you're working on the webcomic? Did you lay all of that out
Yes.
in advance? 'Cause I don't
Yes.
know that every artist does that. That seems like an interesting way to work.
I think most do, because you don't want to paint yourself into a corner. You want to know how the story goes, and even then, there were pages that I laid out that, when it came time to actually draw the pages, we came up with a different idea, and it moved things around. And one of the beauties of working on a computer is, even though I draw everything by hand, if on one page this panel works better here, just cut and paste it in Photoshop and move things around. So, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, you had mentioned before that you have like an inner city, Irish American background.
Right.
So as I was looking at your artwork and the different characters, do you think that kind of had your experience growing up was kind of an influence on the way that you drew some of this?
I don't think so, but I think my interest in comics comes from that. You'll see a lot of kids that grew up in the inner city. I grew up on the east side of Bridgeport when Bridgeport's not great, but Bridgeport when I was a kid was much worse. So when I was I think 14 or 15, there were a lot of bodies in Bridgeport, and a lot of kids as adolescents in inner cities often retreat into fantasy, and so comics held that appeal for me. So that might play a part. I don't think it necessarily does with my style. My other book, Go Home Paddy, it's purposely ugly. I draw the characters like the old ape stereotypes of the Irish, and so maybe it might play more of a part there, where I want to make things ugly and dirty and rough, but not as much on this. But I think my interest in graphic novels comes from being raised in the inner city.
So then what comes next? So after we'd done all this, then we had to give it to somebody to proofread, to print, to price, distribution, and all this other boring stuff that we're not really involved in. But these are part of the process that you have to go through to get to the end product.
We're the talent.
Then Quinnipiac University Press hired a designer, Pentagram. Have any of you heard of them? They're based in New York. They're actually pretty cool. We couldn't wait to get to their offices, so we went down, and they came up with this as our logo. And they actually went back to the Book of Kells to think about the ways in which the monks, hundreds of years ago, scripted the Book of Kells. And this is what they came up with, the Bad Times, and we really love this as a logo. And Collaterals. Things we are working on. There is a web page to accompany the book. It's almost 100 pages. It will go live in 2 weeks' time, and it's mostly primary and secondary sources, plus some curriculum questions written by Dr. Andy Shell. So if people want to use it as a teaching tool, they certainly can. That will be available. Translation to Irish. From the very beginning, we wanted to translate it into Irish, and the Irish government actually have given us a grant to do so, which means they must believe in the project, which is wonderful. Sadly, I found yesterday the checks got lost in the post, but hopefully they'll give us a second one. A digital game, and Dr. Greg Garvey has suggested ways in which his students can perhaps work on a digital game based on moral dilemmas, some of the ones we talked about before. And then somebody was very excited we could make it into an app. We haven't done that, but one thing we thought about doing is a prequel, and based on the story of Coup. So I've actually already written it. It's called A Tale of Courage, Cou's story. So, and that is happier because it is before the famine.
Yeah, it's much more of a children's book as opposed to a graphic novel. It's completely sanitized, but still.
Very nice.
It is. It's very, very nice. It is.
John's going to do the artwork. Okay, so Coup is going to be famous, I hope. And then the designers suggested other collateral stuff, T-shirts, Coup stuffed toy, etc., etc. And they even gave us a picture of what a Coup stuffed toy would look like. So, and finally, this is the cover of the book that they designed. And when we have the Irish version, we'll just have mirror images of the title. So it's a combination of John's artwork. And you might see there's a little message there. I had lunch with the President of Ireland a few weeks ago, and I asked him would he read it and send something to us, and he did. And he said to me, my son loves graphic novels, which is great, but not everyone gets what a graphic novel is. So usually we have to say, well, it's sort of like a comic, but with a serious purpose. And then that's it. That's our bad time. So Gura Maigat, thank you very much.
Thanks for your time. In the back.